Welcome to One Rake at a Time. I'm your host, Art Jones, and today with me today I have a very special guest named Ivan Vincente, and Ivan works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service right here in Crystal River. And Ivan, how long have you been working there at the refuge?
It'll be 9 years now in February.
9 years. Is that a great job or what?
Yeah. Once you love manatees, you love them forever. You know, you want to do what's right for them. So that's what keeps me in the loop here.
Yeah. And were you working at a different refuge before that,
Yeah,
or what's
absolutely.
a little bit of your
I worked in
background?
refuges in National Wildlife Refuges in Colorado and in Puerto Rico with endangered species recovery projects down in the island, and also I did some endangered species work in Slovakia in the Peace Corps. But I've never loved the job more than the one here in Crystal River.
Great. Now, did you go to school for this also?
Yeah, studied wildlife management at the University of Puerto Rico with a few courses in Texas Tech University and other campuses. And this is what I've devoted myself to do since I was 12 years old as a volunteer at the age of 12. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's a great thing seeing things. I know the manatees, from what I understand, were almost on the brink of extinction at one time.
At one point, Kings Bay only used to have just over 60 back in 1976. And all of Florida had about 500 40 years ago. So we've gone from 500 manatees to 5,000, which means that what we're doing is working. What we're doing collectively as a community, as an agency, as a state, is working for manatees.
Yeah, that is amazing. So, what 500 was that the lowest level that they got to? So pretty much the
just below
population,
500.
just
It
below
was
500.
But counts back then in the 60s and 70s were not as accurate as counts are now. There were no synoptic surveys. Basically, the surveys nowadays is a coalition of different agencies flying in different spots during real cold days to count manatee aggregations in power plants and in spring sites. And we have had a better system now than we had back then. Very likely there could have been 1,000 40 years ago, but they were only able to count less than 1,000 back then. But we know for a fact that the population has definitely more than doubled in the past 40 years.
Yeah. And so when you say a synoptic survey, can you explain to our audience what that means exactly, that word?
Yeah, absolutely. The word synopsis is basically, it's like a briefing of different components into one summary. It's almost like a summary of different components. So basically, synoptic means you have surveys in different parts of Florida happening at the same time by different experts, biologists, and then they collectively add in the numbers, and then we have a result of the actual survey for the state of Florida, and that's how we're able to determine how many manatees we have in the state. Only in really cold days is when we have the accurate numbers.
Okay, so then that's the whole key to that type of a survey is that everybody gets out there and does it all at once.
Yes, exactly.
That way you're not counting the same ones and they swam over there and you count them again.
Exactly.
Okay, well that's pretty neat. So there's a lot of coordination. So it's usually always on a really cold day, isn't it?
Oh, it's got to be, because that's what forces animals to be aggregated in one spot. And then what we do is we take pictures from the air, and then we pinpoint and count every individual animal in those photos so that we can get the highest accuracy. Yeah.
Right, and what's interesting about that, I've talked to people in the community, and that's the minimum number of manatees.
That is correct, because there could be more.
There could be more, because sometimes the waters are somewhat cloudy.
Yeah.
And some of them are deeper.
And sometimes you have animals underneath other animals. Sometimes you have mothers and calves that it's really hard to see a 3-foot calf in murky waters, for example, like you're describing. But yeah, that's the minimum. But typically, there's a very small margin of error in those really cold days, because water visibility in cold days tends to be really good. But there's still a margin of error. I mean, you're never going to get the exact number, but it's a very close number.
Yeah, well, that's what I like about that survey. That's the minimum. So we know that at least we've got 5,000 or so out there. So the population's starting to get healthier.
It is
recovering.
It is recovering
from
well.
500, I mean, that's really quite a difference.
Yeah, not many species can recover that quickly in 40 years. There's been some species that have been struggling for a lot longer, like the Florida panther, for example, where we still have dwindling numbers of Florida panthers out there in Florida. And sea turtles is another good example of a species that's doing real well with recovery efforts. You know, your loggerhead sea turtles, and your green sea turtles. Numbers are definitely getting better. Some Camp Ridley's also in the coast, in the shorelines of Texas. We're seeing more and more nesting sea turtles. But manatees are definitely, what I would say, the most iconic and most important species in Florida to recover due to all the different benefits that the species presents, not just for the economy, but also at the ecology level. So it's a very important species to keep, since it's a native, it's actually its own species in Florida. We have the Florida manatee, which is a subspecies of the West Indian manatee. A lot of people hear the word West Indian manatee and they think that the Florida manatee was imported.
Yes, I have heard that.
They think it's an exotic animal that was brought in from the West Indies. No, this is a subspecies that evolved in Florida, and it's just basically a different subspecies from the West Indian species. During the last glaciation, 12,000 years ago, that's when that species started to really evolve on its own here in Florida. So we've had it for over 12,000 years.
Wow, that's very interesting. That's the first time I've ever heard that explanation of it. Because I've heard people around town saying, "Oh, they're illegal aliens. They, they don't belong here. Invasive species and things like that." But that's very interesting. So they're not.
Yeah.
That's the Florida manatee.
Yeah, and there's also a fossil record that tells us that that the Florida manatee has been here for a long time. And some people have actually asked me if there's a prankster god out there burying fossils to test their faith. And I say, no, there's actually a fossil record that tells us there's manatees that have been here for over 12,000
I know.
years.
When I went out to the Indian mounds, in the display in the museum there, they show the manatee fossils, the bones that are in with the oyster mounds and things like that.
Yep, that's right.
The manatee, the Indians.
Native Americans, they did a lot of tools with manatee bones, hooks, etc., utensils for kitchen and all that, for cutting, for piercing, with ribs, with the manatee ribs. There's been a lot of modifications that they made to these bones that suggest that for thousands of years they've been of value to anthropogenic uses, human uses.
Yeah, so they were probably critical to the.
The most important use for manatees back then was actually food. Manatees were hunted continuously on a daily basis, and also by the conquistadors when they first came in. As a matter of fact, the word buccaneer is actually attributed to manatees because that was the meat that they were actually curing. It was manatee meat for those long voyages and those long trips. So those of you who are buck fans, you're manatee fans because buccaneers actually relates to manatee meat, which was the meat that was being cured in this special. Look up the word boucan, which comes. That's actually where the word buccaneer comes from the French word boucan, which is a method of drying manatee meat.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. Isn't it great to watch? We learn something new every day. Well, listen, we're going to take a commercial break, but stay tuned, and I'll be right back, and our guest is going to stay with us. So we'll be right back, folks. Stay tuned. Welcome back to One Rake at a Time. I'm your host, Art Jones, and our guest today is Ivan Vincente. And we've been having a great discussion about manatees. And I'd like to take that to the next step and bring it a little bit more local, because we were talking about the history of manatees and how they ended up in Florida. And it's actually a Floridian manatee. And let's talk about Three Sisters, because really Three Sisters is sort of like a manatee magnet, isn't it?
It's a manatee magnet and a tourist magnet.
Both,
So
yes.
it does bring a lot of good things for this county to have a precious place that provides crystal clear water, a refuge for manatees that are seeking waters that are warm to keep them alive during the cold winter months, and yet people who get in wetsuits and get to experience these incredible encounters and this fascinating phenomenon of these manatees resting during the winter there.
Right, and manatees are a mammal,
Absolutely.
correct? So we're mammals,
Yeah.
correct?
That's right.
So we're kindred spirits there, aren't we?
Yeah, manatees are actually closely in a way related to elephants. It's the closest relative.
Yeah,
Not closely related,
okay.
but yeah.
I've seen some people that look like manatees running around.
I've seen some people who look like elephants. Yeah.
Elephants too, yeah.
So, but yeah, their closest relative is the elephant and the hyrax. They have prehensile lips. Manatees can actually feed by using the muscles in the lip area to be able to. It's almost like a hand grabbing vegetation. But Three Sisters, we're talking about what a place. It's actually getting more and more popularity among the manatee world because manatees now have access to Three Sisters. And
Right.
in the 1940s and 50s, manatees really didn't have access because that one man-made channel, that canal, the residential canal from the bridge down to Three Sisters, wasn't there. That was only a trickle, like a little spring run that was very shallow and very narrow. Manatees really did not have access to the springs up until men
Right. Put in those
created
canals.
this oasis for manatees but they did it for boats and people. They didn't do it for manatees, but accidentally manatees found a way to Three Sisters, and now we got over 300 animals using Three Sisters Springs in each winter, which is, for us, it's amazing because when I first got here 9 years ago, there were only 60 using Three Sisters, and now we have 300 using it.
And is this the same herd? Do you? I know that they
It's a local
identify
population.
certain manatees.
Absolutely. Manatees practice what is known as site fidelity. Basically, they identify with one safe area to spend the winters, and that's where they go each year. That's why the animals that go to power plants are a big concern for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because if those power plants stop running, manatees are not going to know where to go because they've been going there every winter and they can die as a result of cold stress. So like in 2010, when we had a really cold year in January 15, 2010, we ended up with 200 new animals that were like, where did they come from? Well, they came from power plants that could no longer keep them as warm as they were because the warm water discharge from those power plants back in 2010 could not compensate for the cold that we experienced when the water Gulf temperatures were 40 degrees. It was really hard to discharge that much warm water in a power plant to keep them alive, because it takes a lot of money to heat up water. And the power plants are, in a way, they're bound by law to release warm water regardless of production of energy so that they can keep those manatees safe.
Oh, really?
Yes, they have to.
I didn't know that.
They have to keep that warm water going and flowing.
If that has become sort of a manatee hangout.
Exactly. It's a manatee hangout, and by law, we have to protect this endangered species. The power plants have to run their warm waters,
Interesting. Interesting. I didn't know that.
Including the one in Crystal River, which still hosts this manatee to this point.
But there's not as many up there now, is there?
No.
They seem to prefer Kings Bay.
Every manatee is going to prefer that one guaranteed spot, which is a natural spring versus a power plant.
I know that they love Kings Bay, and they seem to love the people here too, and the people love them. And so, I mean, if you're hanging out at the power plant, I was a manatee, that's pretty boring. You come into Kings Bay, wow, you've got entertainment.
Yeah, you see all these crazy vessels, kayaks, paddleboards, canoes,
and
swimmers, manatees are
looking
curious.
at you.
Yeah,
So,
and manatees in reality, they care more about resting and sleeping, but sometimes they do get bored and are like, oh, well, let's see what's out there today. And they see a person like we see an alien, and
right. There does seem to be, when I've been out there does seem to be, like we say, they're mammals. There seems to be a natural connection. I don't know if it's spiritual or what, but there seems to be a great connection.
There is definitely something mysterious about manatees because they're willing to cope with us regardless of what we've done to the environment in coastal Florida.
Right.
Manatees are very forgiving.
Right.
And they're still willing to cope. They come and approach us. They go to our backyards and they trust us. Even though we hunted them for decades, for centuries, we hunted manatees, almost to extinction.
But now we just scratch them on
no one's killing manatees out there, which is a good thing, except in certain countries where The government allows it due to sustainability. It's actually just because some tribes traditionally
Down in Brazil and places
in
like
Belize
that.
and yeah. So, but they have limits.
But in Kings Bay itself, there's a tremendous interaction with people and manatees, isn't there? And
Yeah,
the manatees,
absolutely.
you think that if the manatees really, I've heard people say, oh, they don't like the people. Well, no, I always say, well, if they didn't, they could go hang out at the power plant.
Yeah.
Look where they are.
To me, the most important part
Yeah.
about this connection is a change of heart that many people experience when they get to submerge in the manatee world and have that magic encounter, and it's love at first sight to many of them. Where they are like, wow, this species is remarkable. This species is amazing. We need to protect this amazing animal. I had no idea they were like this, and that they behave this fashion, and that they're so gentle and tactile in a way. And so Kings Bay does offer that magic moment between people and manatees. And to us, we just want to manage things so that ecotourism is practiced at the education level. I think we need a little more education elements so that people really learn more about the species and not really come here and treat this place like a theme park, like a petting zoo. Our agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, cares about education because in reality the key is for people to know what is it that it takes to keep these animals in a sustainable population. What is it these animals need?
Right.
And
well, we know they need food.
Yes.
And they need warm water in the winter.
Yeah, but they also do something very marvelous for us, and it's actually an ecological benefit that they provide to humans. And when they go out there and they feed on seagrass beds, they do it in such fashion where these seagrass beds tend to be healthier and grow healthier, and that's where our estuaries are. That's where our fisheries depend on. So the healthier the manatee population, and the more dispersed we have a population out there, the healthier we have, the healthier estuary we have, and the healthier fisheries we have. So a lot of people don't realize that the manatee foraging habits attribute to healthy seagrass bed ecosystem.
Okay, by grazing it down.
By grazing, just like you mow your lawn, the more you mow it, the healthier it looks. Same thing.
Yeah. It encourages that grass growth more, and it creates more oxygen, so it gets rid of all of the aging grass and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Well, that is absolutely fascinating. Well, Art Jones, one rake at a time. What a great show we're having today. And stay tuned. I'm going to have Ivan Vincente on the next segment too, so we'll be right back. Welcome back to One Rake at a Time. I'm your host, Art Jones, and today our guest is Ivan Vincente. And we were talking about all sorts of manatee issues and things like that. And I just wanted to bring it really back down into Kings Bay and what we're doing for the manatees here in Kings Bay, and how we connect that with our One Rake at a Time project. Because our One Rake at a Time project is looking to restore the bay. And in restoring the bay, we want to increase habitat for manatees. We want to increase the food source for manatees. Yeah. And Ivan, you were just saying that the manatees here have gone from 60 to 300 just at Three Sisters. Yeah. And then in all of Kings Bay, what's been the top number for all of Kings Bay?
About 600. 567, but I'm pretty sure that there's been over 600 manatees in Kings Bay at one time. See, we only do the surveys once every 2 weeks with a plane, and we don't get to select the day. It's a set of days, and there's been optimal conditions in Kings Bay where I know for a fact we've had over 600 animals.
And they weren't optimal all over the state, so you didn't actually count that day.
That's exactly right.
Well, I know that when I first moved here, King Springs was a manatee hangout. And now it
still is, actually.
Is it?
Oh, yeah, still is. I mean, last year, during one of the surveys, we had nearly 400 manatees in the King Spring, and it is still considered the #1 spring for manatee survival in the state of Florida. The King Spring and Mullet Hole, adjacent to the King Spring, are definitely the two most important springs in the state of Florida for manatees, because they have the capacity to host the most manatees due to the amount of warm water that is discharged through these spring vents. Okay. They're very large. They're not first magnitude, they're second magnitude, but we're talking
There's two of them.
We're talking about 30 million gallons of water per day that is being discharged out of these two incredible spring vents, and it's shallow all around there. And that's where they hang out. So that warm
water comes up in it. It's a much larger area than Three Sisters.
But Three Sisters Springs offers one thing that the King Spring doesn't offer, and that's a buffer area from windshield. You have properties all around Three Sisters. You have the trees surrounding the springs, and you have
Yeah.
really shallow water all around there. And for manatees, that's really what they like. That's why we've had
Yeah.
over 300 manatees in Three Sisters at once in a real cold day with high tides.
Yeah.
But the vegetation, these 600 animals can definitely, play a very, in a way, detrimental role in the vegetation that grows in Kings Bay, but it always comes back and grows in the summer months. But that is your expertise. Vegetation in Kings Bay is what you do, and
Right.
we know about the vegetation shift that Kings Bay has suffered over the past 40 years. Where we had once beautiful Vallisneria, eelgrass, and now then hydrilla, and now we're seeing Eurasian water milfoil
Right.
because of the
Right, it's been
salinity in the
changing.
bay, because it's salt-tolerant species. Well, manatees are depleting all of this vegetation in the winter. Because
Right.
you got 600, they can eat up to 10% of their body weight in a single day. And that's why they're forced to go out 9 miles, feed in the Gulf, and then come back in and huddle up in the springs as fast as possible so they can digest and survive. But I think that we do have a promising situation in Kings Bay for the native vegetation, Art. I really do.
Right. We're working very hard to restore it, not only for the manatees, but for all of the wildlife that belong in the bay and the people. We want to see those eelgrass as ideal. And Swift Mud now has eelgrass growing out at the Duke Energy
That's right.
facility. So partnering with them, we're getting those thick benthic mats of muck out of the way so that we can put those eelgrass mats down there.
And the experts, they all agree that that's the solution. We have got to get this muck that in a way is even toxic
Right.
for a healthy eelgrass bed population.
Right.
And I think that what we're seeing in the community between your efforts and efforts of other organizations that have recently formed that want to dredge certain areas that really need it, I think that these things over the short run, we should be seeing some amazing restoration efforts and improved water quality is what we're all hoping for.
Yeah, and we've already seen it in Cedar Cove. We've
That's right.
seen it in small areas around Hunter Springs. We've even seen it in Three Sisters, where the first time we cleaned up there, it was a lot of Lingbia coming out, a lot of black muck. And
Yes.
when we just did it earlier this year in September, there was one section of it that had that black muck, and the rest of it was a very minimal amount of algae without all that thick benthic mats built up. And what's nice is you get that out of the way, the natural plants start coming back.
Absolutely.
You know, the southern naiad, the coontails,
Yeah.
even the hydrilla. The hydrilla, I know it can get out of control, but the manatee population now,
They keep it under control.
they love it, don't they?
They do. And the Eurasian water milfoil as well, but there's one
That's
natural.
a little stemmy, though, that milfoil, isn't it?
They still eat it. That's
Yeah,
why we
they
have.
still eat it.
That's why some manatees are positively buoyant because of that stemmy,
They've got
hard
gas.
to digest. But there's one natural thing that we're seeing in Kings Bay that is really important to mention, and it looks like we're out of the drought that's been tormenting Florida for so many years. Over the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of rain.
Isn't that wonderful?
It is good.
I love it.
However,
I love
a lot of fresh water in the amount that we've been getting, it does tend to have impacts on the seagrass beds in the Gulf. Seagrass beds do not like fresh water, but eelgrass does. And the native submerged aquatic vegetation that we used to have in Kings Bay loves fresh water.
Yeah.
So there's a price to pay in the Gulf, but it's not that bad. I mean,
No.
there will always be seagrass beds growing.
Yeah, the Gulf's pretty big compared to our little springs.
Exactly. So we celebrate rain because apparently we're out of the drought. We're seeing more water output, and that helps with flow. And flow is what reduces this turbidity that we have in Kings Bay. The more flow we have,
Yeah.
look at the Rainbow River. There's more nitrate in the Rainbow River and better visibility because there's constant flow over there. In Kings Bay, we don't have the flow. If we only had the
Right.
flow,
Right, we
would
found
have
that in
crystal
Cedar
clear water.
Cove where just probably during the drought years or just over the years, spring vents had gotten totally clogged and basically weren't working anymore. And we got in there and we're raking, and then all of a sudden a little spring comes up and we rake more, and now you've got springs coming up there. You've unlocked that water flow, and now the clarity there is just
Visibility
amazing.
there is quite good. We're at more rain
And right
too,
behind
of
after
new
we clean,
seeds.
it's like we clean this wall coming out cleaning. Right behind where we're cleaning, you get the southern naiad, the coontails. You get the better vegetation coming in.
Absolutely.
And we were doing that last year. And as you mentioned, the manatees are kind of our lawnmower. They come in, and by springtime it's all gone, which doesn't really hurt our cleanup effort because we've got good stuff growing, we don't clean it. But yet the algae will tend to get in there and suffocate it. So by them cleaning it out again, it allows us to get in there in the spring, re-clean up that ling out of there and get that whole cycle of beneficial SAB growing.
I think that these efforts of you guys and then the manatees on the side helping, we're going to have a good thing in Kings Bay in the future.
That's right, that's right. Well, thank you very much for being our guest today.
My pleasure. I hope to do this again.
Has enjoyed it very much.
All right.
So Art Jones, one rake at a time. Thanks for watching.